Good afternoon, everyone. I am Ritu, your host for today's The Art of Persuasion session. So, persuasion is not just about the convincing the people; it's about building trust, influencing decisions, and making an impact. And today we have an expert speaker with us today who will help us to master these beautiful skills. So, before we dive in, I'd like to take a moment to thank Vasco for agreeing to do this beautiful session for us. We truly appreciate his time and the insights. So it's my pleasure to welcome Vasco, a top-rated Udemy instructor partner with 188,000 students and 27 stellar reviews. He is a former intelligence lead at MIT Portugal startup accelerator, where he worked closely with top entrepreneurs and investors. He also a tech entrepreneur who built $2 million startups before becoming a top performance coach. Vasco specializes in negotiation, influence, and leadership, helping top executives close high value, deal, manage teams effectively, and communicate with impact. His approach is straightforward and practical, result driven, making him a trusted coach for business leader worldwide. So we are here for an insightful session. So let's warm welcome to Vasco. Over to you, Vasco.
Thank you so much, Rita, for that amazing introduction. I want to thank everybody, of course, for your time today, and Ritu and the whole Ethica team for having me. Thank you for your time and for this opportunity. I just want to confirm that everybody can hear me properly, and I'm going to share my screen as well, which I think that perfect. Okay, so what I want to talk about today is the art of persuasion, which is, it's a little bit of a no mean feat to try and present all the basics of persuasion in 45 minutes or less. So what I wanted to tell you is a little bit about how to persuade, how to pitch, and how to speak, a couple of easy techniques and simple techniques that you can learn to use in the workplace. They are very simple, that are ethical, do not include manipulation, do not include lying of any sort, and that you can use. The goal is not for you to use all of these techniques. The goal is just for you to pick one or two that you really like or that you think that are really interesting, and then to use them to naturally improve your persuasion process. And they're very flexible, right? You can use them to sell, you can use them to fundraise, you can use them to sell yourself in the corporate world, you can use them to ask for a favor, and a lot of different things. So I wanted to start by asking a very simple question, right? Which is, how do you usually persuade, right? And if you want, just drop very quickly a line in the chat about how you usually persuade. Do you usually argue? Do you usually appeal to emotion? Do you usually use facts? Do you try to, persuade in person, or do you try to do it digitally and not even have to deal with the other side in person? So just a quick question. If somebody you could share very quickly, how do you usually persuade, right? What are the weapons that you use? Okay, I already see a very good answer, right, with references. Akash, that is good, right? Using facts and using authority. What else do some of you use, right? Anybody here who uses probably emotion, for example, to try to appeal to the other side or to try to build a personal connection with them? So how do you usually persuade, right? Always better in person, building a relationship. That is good. Facts and data, also an excellent approach. So different people react to different things, right? Emotion is also a good way to do it. So there are many different ways, as we're seeing, to persuade somebody, right? When we talk about a great persuader, by the way, or a great speaker, there's nobody that masters all of these at once, right? Somebody uses emotion, somebody may be great at using data, but usually there is no person that can simultaneously persuade at an elite level using emotion and facts and authority and communication and digital and physical and all of these, right? We usually have a specialization. But okay, so persuasion versus manipulation also, what is the difference, right? This is the first thing that I want to cover very quickly. Usually we talk about persuasion when we are convincing the other side to do something with their agreement, while manipulation is without the person being in agreement or we are tricking them in some way. And naturally, is in case it's not obvious, we do not want to manipulate under any circumstance, right? Because it always backfires, right? Even if you could do it, the person would find out eventually and it would be a lot worse than the initial situation. So it's never worth it. And I always teach persuasion techniques that are ethical and that do not involve manipulation. But the good thing is you can still have very powerful persuasion techniques with the other side's agreement and by involving them and without using manipulation. So you can still have a lot of power without ever resorting to these techniques. So Getting a little bit technical here, right? You don't have to memorize these by any way, but I usually say that there are 10 different types of persuasion, right? So consistency persuasion is about continuing something, right? If you say something or you do something, you can get the other side to continue doing that thing, right? For example, if they agree with you on something, you can get them to agree on another thing that is similar. That is what I call consistency persuasion. It's about maintaining consistency. People usually tend to do or tend to say what they usually already did or said in the past. Then we have emotional persuasion, right? It's appealing to emotion, either by triggering an emotion in the other person or by you sharing an emotion and kind of infecting them with that emotion, usually in a positive manner, right? Then we have illustration, which is one of my favorite types. Illustration is showing how something can be done or suggesting something, right? There's a lot of talk about suggestion in persuasion, and that's illustration. It's about, for example, making something seem easy, making something seem fast, making something seem very simple to do, right? It is suggestion and illustration. The same thing can seem very hard or very easy based on how you suggest it, right? So that is illustration. Then we have standards, which is defining rules, right? For example, if you have two criteria for a project, which is it has to be financially successful and it has to be quick, if you change those criteria, then a good project can be a bad project, right? Because if you remove the criteria about the project being fast, then now a project that would be slow would have a higher score. So you can persuade also by defining rules, and then the value of something is higher or lower based on those rules. By the way, we're not going to touch on all of these types. I'm going to select just a couple of these to talk about today. But this is just an overview so that you can see the different types of persuasion that exist, which are a lot. Then we have pressure, right, which is using presence or intensity. And in this case, it's very important to do this ethically because it's very easy to fall into manipulation here, which we don't want to do. But you can use intensity in a good manner, right? By showing emotion, by building a connection with the other side, by being there in person, having that presence, right? Almost like stage presence. And you can persuade just with that pressure or intensity. Then we have identification, right, which is showing common ground, showing commonalities, using empathy, showing the other person that you are just like them in some way, similar experiences, similar thoughts, or at the end of the day, just showing that you identify with the person. Then we have facts, using appealing facts. There are certain types of numbers, such as, for example, percentages, fractions, other things that seem better than the other versions of that same fact. So the same fact or the same number can seem very attractive or not at all, depending on how you frame it. And we're going to talk a little bit about this. Then we have context. Context is a very interesting persuasion type, possibly the most powerful one. And why is this? Because context is everything. If you change the context of something, you change the point of comparison. And because of that, you change the value of something, right? Let's say, for example, that you have a book that costs $20, right? If you compare it to books that cost $10, it seems very expensive. But if you say that it's a technical book and most technical books cost $100, then those 20 now make it seem the cheapest thing by comparison. If you change the point of comparison, in many cases, you literally change the value of something. Then we also have labeling. And labeling is changing the name of something, right? Attributing a positive name or a negative name, right? By saying that something has, a very good name or a very good attribute, or make it seem more sophisticated, you can persuade more with it, right? You see this a lot in books that use scientific words, like, for example, related to physics, right? Instead of, for example, having a book that is excellent sales, they call them quantum sales, or, for example, exponential sales, right? And it seems very sophisticated, when in reality, it's exactly the same thing, right? There are certain words or certain labels that just persuade because we use them, right? And then also permission. Permission is about giving or taking away somebody's permission to do something, and that can persuade. For example, if you tell somebody, hey, you only have until this week to take care of this, you are taking away their permission to relax about that topic, and that persuades because it forces them to take an action. But on the other side, you can also give permission, right? If you tell somebody, for example, this product is going to make your dreams come true, then you are giving them permission to relax with the product, right? So there are many ways to persuade. Again, you can probably find this graphic on the internet or on my Persuasion Wiki. There's a lot of different resources, but I don't want you to memorize all of these. I just want you to know all of the different types of persuasion that exist, right? And these can also all be used the wrong way, right? So for every type of persuasion, there can also be manipulation. You can use, for example, consistency persuasion, but you can also use consistency manipulation. And again, it never works in the long term. Don't do it. So to give you an example, right? Illustration, as we mentioned, is about suggestion. It's about saying that something is simple, it's easy, etc. So you can use illustration persuasion, which is when you tell, for example, somebody, hey, this is very easy to do, and it's just 3 steps, and the thing actually is easy. But you can also use illustration manipulation, which is when you tell somebody this is very easy and very simple, and it's just 3 steps, but that's a lie because it's complicated, right? So any type of persuasion also has a corresponding type of manipulation if you use it the wrong way, right? So just something to keep in mind. These could be used the wrong way, but don't use them because it's never worth it. So what I decided to do today is to take the 4 types out of these that I think that work the best to the workplace, right? In the workplace, sorry, which would be illustrating, using facts, using identification, and using consistency, right? And I'm going to give you some examples of these techniques for these 4 types. But I'd like to ask you a short question, right? So from the simple description that I gave you, what do you think is the best type, or why do you think that each of these types works in the workplace? For example, illustration, when you are suggesting things, think that something is simple, is easy, why would that work in the workplace? Or facts, for example, using appealing numbers, appealing facts, why would that persuade in the workplace? Or identification, right? Building common ground with the other side, sharing common experiences or sharing common traits. Why do you think that would work? So if you want, just drop a very quick line in the chat saying, hey, I think that facts would work because of this, or I think that illustration and suggestion would work because of this, right? Or consistency, for example, right? Why would consistency work in the workplace, right? Getting somebody to say something and then continuing to say that thing, for example, agreeing with you and continuing to agree, right? Why would that work? So Deepika, I really like the point. Many people are visual, so illustration would work perfectly. By the way, this illustration is not just visual, right? It's also in your mind. There's something which is called mental effort. And mental effort is most of the effort associated with something is mental. It's not the real effort, right? To give you a very simple example, if somebody wants to go run, right, they can have a very high effort view of it or a low effort view. Some people think, I need to get the running gear, I need to prepare the water bottle, I need to get up on time, etc. It's high effort. But other people are going to think, I just need to go and run, right? So the perceived effort is not the same as the real effort. So illustration is just reducing the mental effort. It could be visual, but it can also just be making somebody respond to that suggestion. It could be suggesting that something has a lower number of steps, or that it's just, at the end of the day, easier to do or simpler to do. But this is a great answer. Or a reference point to persuade, right, Akash? I assume that this one is about facts, right, in specific. Yes. So as you see, there are these 4 different types, and we are going to explore how every single one of these can be used, right? Okay, Deepika, this is also a great answer. Consistency makes you come across as a trustworthy person. Exactly. And by the way, this is also why some people use it to manipulate in a dark manner, which we never want to do, which is there's something called the consistency trap, which is when somebody has done something in the past, you force them to keep doing it because otherwise you say, oh, you are contradicting yourself, right? So if somebody says, for example, I'm going to support a project, and then suddenly they don't want to support it as much, some people could say, hey, you said that you were supported it in the past, but you are not supporting it, right? So that is what is called the consistency trap. When you use somebody's past words or their past actions against them. It's not recommended. It doesn't work. What's usually recommended is to do it in a positive manner. So for example, if somebody says, hey, you said that you would support this project in the past, and because you said that, and because you are a trustworthy person, and because you are somebody who is, a person of their worth, I would love if you could keep supporting this, right? So there's the positive version of that. But this is true, right? We all want to be seen as people who have a consistent point of view, and we don't contradict ourselves, and that's why consistency works, right? So great answers so far. I love them. So let's start with illustration, right? So illustration, as we mentioned, it's about suggestion. It's about making something seem simple or fast or other types of things that have reduced mental effort. And this makes the other side more likely to be persuaded. So as we said, right, illustration is giving an impression. It's about suggestion. And there are 3 common techniques that are used here. One is dividing something into a number of steps or a number of parts. For example, if you have a very complex process that is going to take a month, if you say this is a process that takes a month, the person is going to feel overwhelmed. But if you say, hey, it's just three simple steps over this month, then it seems simple, right? It seems less effort. So anything that can be broken down into parts is going to persuade more. In fact, in productivity, we've been talking about this for a long time, right? Anytime that you have a gigantic task, if you just break it down into a smaller number of tasks, you persuade yourself to do it more easily because it's more digestible, right? So that's dividing into steps or into parts. Then we have words that reduce effort, right? Using words like simple or quick or easy always persuade the other side more, even if the thing is exactly the same, right? So to give you an example, if you have software, like for example, Netflix, right? When you try to register for software as a service, they always say 2 simple steps to get you set up, right? Just insert your name, your email, credit card information, or whatever it is, and you are done. They could phrase it in a different way. They could say, this is a long process until you register. But no, they always say, it's simple, it's quick, you get instant access. There are certain words that just reduce the effort associated with them, the perceived effort, and because of that, they make it seem easy, right? And then we also have potential. And this one is probably the most interesting one, because here's the thing. Persuasion studies have shown that if something does not have a track record, just sharing that it has high potential can persuade more than if you have the track record. So let me clarify that. They did studies, for example, with candidates where one candidate have, for example, 10% in terms of results, in terms of a proven track record. The other candidate did not have any track record, but they had the potential to achieve 20% results. And people would be persuaded by the potential instead of the track record. Naturally, not all people, but persuasion studies have shown that if something is of high potential, then it persuades a lot. So when you are still unsure about the value of something, you can highlight the potential that it has. This has the potential to highlight savings. This has the potential to achieve this for us. I, as a candidate, have the potential to save you this amount of money, etc. So the high potential of something also serves for that suggestion or illustration. So some very quick examples, right? First, dividing into steps, right? Dividing a process into 3 key steps or an area into 3 simple areas and so on. Again, very common in software, right? I don't know how many people were using software back like 20 years ago or 30 years ago when we would have the installation wizards, right? Where you would have a small application and you have to click next, you select the directory, etc. But they would also have 2 simple steps or 3 simple steps, right? And then by the way, even if something has a larger number of steps, you can group them. So for example, if something has 12 steps, then you don't want to say this has 12 steps. That's not simple. But you can group those 12 steps into maybe 3 steps for each. And you just say this has 3 steps. And in each step, there's 4 things to do. But the idea that remains in the person's mind is, oh, it's 3 steps, so it's very simple, right? All of this, again, is about mental effort. You want to reduce the effort that is associated with something because the value of something may be the same, but there are ways to make it seem less effort and ways to make it seem higher effort. Then second technique, right? Effort reducing words. And this one is very simple. There are certain words that when you use them, they just have low effort associated, right? We covered some of them. Simple, quick, easy, straightforward, streamlined, or step-by-step, or turnkey, or off the shelf, and so on. There are certain expressions or certain words that when you use them, immediately what comes to the person's mind is low effort, right? So you can say things such as, for example, hey, this project is very quick and easy to set up. And there are situations where if something is not easy, you can still say that it's simple, right? Or something may not be simple, but it's easy. So you don't always have to use these words. Again, you do not ever want to lie, but you do want to enhance the truth a little bit within ethical parameters. So for example, if you think, is this simple? It is simple, right? It's not as simple as it could be, but it is simple. Then you can say that it is simple, right? So these words can be used to enhance something and make it seem more valuable. Again, at the end of the day, just do not lie. If something is not simple, do not say that it is, right? But you can see how this works. And then finally, high potential, right? As we mentioned, the potential of something in many cases persuades more than the track record itself, right? So saying, for example, this project can save you 10% in costs, or this person could be the best performer, that can work because that potential persuades. You are essentially showing how good something can be. Maybe you don't even know how good it is, but you are showing how good it can be, right? Going deeper, that creates what is called an anchoring effect in persuasion, right? Because anchoring is when you have an extreme value, that extreme first impression is saved in the person's mind, and then everything that comes after is judged by that standard, right? But I don't want to get very technical here, but essentially the high potential persuades. That's the key lesson to take from here. If you just say this has the potential to do this or to do that, then a lot of people will be persuaded by that. Again, don't lie, right? If you say, for example, this project can save 10% in costs, if the project does not have that potential, please don't say that, right? So you want to share the high potential that something does in fact have, right? And what are some do's and don'ts here, right? You want to simplify. This is all about digesting complex types of information and just outputting a simple answer. You want to kind of spoon feed it to the person so that there is less mental effort. Then you want to not lie, right? Something can be faster or simpler up to a point, but never reach a point where you're actually lying. If you're saying that something is fast and it's not fast, that's not persuasion. That is just being dishonest, and you should never do that. And then you also want to use various types. As we mentioned, right? What if something is simpler and it's faster and it does have high potential and it can be split into a number of steps? So you can combine these techniques here, right? And by the way, I selected these 3 techniques, but there are dozens of techniques for each of these types, right? These are just quick and simple techniques that you can take right now and start using in your everyday work life. And you don't even have to memorize all of these. I would say pick the one that resonates the most throughout this presentation and use that one. And then maybe you can rewatch it after a month, pick another technique, practice it as well, right? So you don't have to take this all at once, right? There's a lot of documentation, there's a lot of presentations about this. You can take your time, right? Pick the one that resonates the most with you right away. Okay, on to the second type, fact persuasion, which is persuading with facts, right? What you want to do here is you want to use appealing numbers or other types of facts that people react to and that make something seem of value. So it's about using appealing facts. And what are some persuasion techniques here? So one of them is attractive numbers. There are certain numbers that just persuade more by their existence. It's just a psychological phenomenon. So for example, specific numbers. When you are in a negotiation, for example, if something is, for example, $40,000, if instead of saying we have a proposal of $40,000, you say we have a proposal of 39,931, it seems more specific. Why? Because it gives the impression that you did some sort of calculation and that the number is justified. If you say it's 40,000, it seems like it's an approximation, like it's an estimate, and people don't take you as seriously. Now, specific numbers work even when they don't have a reason, right? If you give out that specific number of 39,961, for example, then people are going to think that you did the calculations, even if there are no calculations. Specific numbers just persuade more. Then numbers ending in 7, right? In many cases, such as, for example, for marketing, if anybody has a marketing background, they know this by heart, right? Numbers that end in 7 persuade a lot. So if the price of something, for example, is 40, then if the price is 37 instead, then it persuades more, or 47. People just like the number 7 at the end of something. And then finally, percentages and fractions, right? Instead of saying, for example, we are going to save this specific amount of money versus this total, if you say, for example, we are going to save 15% of this total, it persuades more. Even better, again, if it's a specific number, right? So saying we are going to save 14.9% of this budget, right? So you can combine these. There are certain types of numbers that just persuade more by their existence, right? Then another interesting thing is the baseline, or changing the baseline. So the baseline, as we all know, is the average for something, right? It's the normal value. But the interesting thing is, if you change the baseline, you change how attractive a number is. So to give you an example, let's say, for example, that you are talking about the results of a given department, and let's say that the results are 25%. Is that a good or a bad number? Well, it depends. Maybe if you compare it to last year was 20. So this 25 seems good compared to the 20. But maybe if you compare it to 5 years ago, the result was 40. So 25% compared to 40 seems bad. In other words, by changing what you compare something to, you change the value of it, right? So what is the baseline? What is the normal value that you are comparing something to? There's one type which is usually done, which is manipulation, and you never want to do it. But there are companies, for example, that what you do is they have good results, then they have bad results. But in the year immediately after the bad results, they say, oh, we had an improvement of 200%. That was not an improvement. You just went back from the negative to the normal, right? So if you compare it to the normal, it's bad. But because they are comparing it to the terrible year that they had last year, it seems amazing, right? So this is an example of how not to do this, right? But in an ethical manner, you can pick the point of comparison that makes something look better within the justifiable ones. And this is very important, for example, when you're talking about a person's performance or a team's performance. What do you compare it to? You compare it to other teams? You compare it to other teams last year? Do you compare it to other teams in different companies, in different sectors? So by changing what you compare something to, you make it seem better or worse, right? And then finally, changing the criteria. If you change the criteria that you have for something, you change the value that it has. As we mentioned, right, that example of the project. If you have a project that it needs to be financially successful and it needs to be fast, those are 2 criteria, right? But if you take away the criteria about being fast and you remove it, now a project that would be slow, it would have a low score because it needed to be successful and fast, but now it doesn't need to be fast anymore. The only criteria is to be successful. So now it seems better. So depending on the criteria that you use to score something, you can make it seem better or worse by comparison, right? So by the way, if anybody has any question, right, raise your hand or drop something in the chats. I'm assuming that you are understanding and agreeing with all of this so far, right? But in case anybody has any questions, we also have a Q&A section at the end. So by starting using attractive numbers, as we mentioned, right, specific numbers persuade more. Instead of 40,000 saying, hey, this project will cost 38,000.792, right? Why? Because anytime that a person uses a specific number, everybody else thinks, oh, they have a justification for it. They did simulations, they did calculations, and this is an exact number. But that's the trick. Even if you don't do any calculations, if you just present a specific number, people are going to assume that, right? Or saying, for example, the project will cost 37 because it's a number ending in 7. 37 instead of 40 does persuade. I think that the number 7 just looks cool in certain elements like prices or costs, right? It's just a psychological phenomenon. And then the fractions or percentages, right? Instead of saying, for example, a specific number, saying 45% of this or 15% of this or 2/3 of this budget or 1/4 of this budget. Why? Because I think that it appeals to the scientific side. People think, oh, instead of this person saying this is going to cost a specific number, they say it's going to cost 11/12 of that number. It makes the person seem scientific, like they're making an advanced calculation, right? So all of this is about using the same facts that you would use anyway, but making them seem more appealing. Then, as we mentioned, the baseline change, right? We have a profit of 13% for a specific department. Is that high or is that low? Well, it depends on the baseline, right? If last year was 10, then the 13 compared to the 10 seems good. But if in the last 5 years, the average was 20, then now we are comparing the 13 against the 20, and now it seems worse, right? So what you can do is, out of all of the options that we have, we can pick the one that makes us look the best. Naturally, still an honest comparison, right? You don't want to make up a number. But if you have multiple options to compare something to, then what you can do is you can use that. In many cases, you can even use that as a defense, right? Because sometimes you are presenting and somebody says, hey, these numbers are a little bit worse than last year. And you say, yes, but they are better than this other team, or they are better than what happened 2 years ago, or they are better than this other point of comparison. It just gives you more options to have that context, right? And then finally, changing the criteria. As we mentioned, right? Let's say that we have a project and that project needs to achieve speed and savings. And those are 2 criteria, right? Each one is worth 50%. So if you have a project that saves costs, but it's slow, so it fits one of the criteria, but it doesn't fit the other. If you have those 2 criteria, then that project is worth 15%, 50%, right? Why? Because it has the results, it doesn't have the speed. But if you just increase the weight of the savings and you decrease the weight of the criteria for the speed, then now it's worth more, right? Because the results have a bigger weight on the total. By the way, there's a lot of manipulation that is done with this specific type of technique with algorithms. Why? Because you have a lot of companies that may have algorithms that are hidden and they give different weights to different things, and you never have any idea why they are ranking you in some way or why they are showing you certain types of content, right? They can just change the weights and then they give priority to certain people versus others, and they never know why that happened, right? But again, that's what you don't want to do. Anytime that you have a score or a system of some sort, you want to be honest about the criteria, you want to be transparent, but you do want to be aware that if you change the criteria, then the value of something changes compared to those criteria, right? Then do's and don'ts, right? You don't want to twist the facts. Yes, you want to embellish those facts, but you never want to actually lie, right? You can use a number that seems cooler, you can use a number that seems more scientific, but you never want to use a false number, for example. That should never be done. Then you don't want to omit facts, right? If you say that something is good, but you don't show the bad part of it, and that's why it seems good, that's a lie as well, and you never want to do this. And then you do want to simplify, right? Because you can simplify numbers besides using those scientific numbers or those specific numbers. It's kind of combining the previous technique with this one. You can use appealing facts and then have something that seems very fast, very quick, very simple. You're kind of like combining these 2 persuasion techniques into one thing. That's what I call a persuasion stack, which is when you take individual techniques and then you use a combination of them and then you hit the person with them, and they're very effective. So, question time. Which technique do you like the most so far? and would you use it, or what would you use it for? I'm sorry, I skipped the slide there, but we're back. By the way, tell me if everything is making sense to everybody so far. Are you liking it? Do you see the use in these techniques or practical examples? And we are about halfway in terms of the techniques, right? So I showed you 2 families of persuasion techniques. We have 2 more after this one. Awesome, Hamad. Nice to see it's making sense so far. So this is just a short checkpoint, right? To ask you if they make sense to you. Perfect. Amir, numbering technique, very nice. So by the way, these are some of the most powerful ones, right? So I'm not saving the good stuff for later here. I will literally took some of the most powerful persuasion techniques and thought, let me simplify them and let me put them here on the slides, right? So if you use these, in a lot of cases, you are going to supercharge your presentations or conversations or any other type of persuasion situation that you find yourself in. I'm sorry. Okay, so on to family number 3, which is identification, right? And this one is pretty simple, right? Which is showing similarities, empathy, or other elements in common with the other side, right? By the way, great point, Kamlesh. Yes, we use a lot of these techniques without being aware that they're being used. Yes, in a lot of cases, persuasion is literally just taking what we already do subconsciously and then refining them, asking, why does this work? Why does this provoke a reaction? And then kind of making it systematic, or being a little bit of a nerd about it, just like I'm a persuasion nerd. It's about making it a system in a way. So identification. Identification is about showing similar traits or experiences with the other side. This one is very simple and very intuitive, possibly the most intuitive. But within identification, you still have multiple techniques, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. So what are some common techniques with identification? So one is common ground. And common ground is sharing similar experiences or similar traits, right? Do you notice that these are 2 different things? You can have somebody that is not similar to you, but they went through the same things. And because of that, you kind of build a bond, or you can have somebody that is similar to you, right? So they can be similar experiences by different people, or it can be similar people. You can literally be just like the other person. Then we have mirroring. And anybody that has, been in the game of NLP or, the old persuasion hypnosis techniques like 20 years ago knows about mirroring. But essentially, it's about imitating or mimicking some component of the other side's attitude or their behavior to bond more with them. You have, for example, verbal mirroring, where you take the person's expressions and you start using them as well to bond with a person. Or you have, for example, physical mirroring, where you mirror the person's gestures and their pose, right? For example, if they put their fingers on their chin to think, you start doing that as well. And then subconsciously, the person thinks that you are similar to them because you are adopting similar mannerisms, right? And then finally, you also have customizing. You may think this one seems a little bit out of place. What does it have to do with identification? Well, customizing is when you are pitching or presenting or just speaking with the other side, if you make it seem like what you are saying is specific just for them, you did it just for them, that shows identification, because it shows that you are taking specific information about them and you are using it to do something that is just for them. So it creates that sense of identification, right? It's something that is tailor-made for them, but you don't have to fully customize something to get that effect. You can do kind of a shortcut here that is still ethical, and we're going to talk about that. But for example, using common ground, right? What you do is you share something in common with the other side. For example, if you are trying to pitch to somebody who is very carefree, you can show them how you are carefree as well, right? If they're, for example, they're into sports, traveling a lot, you can talk about, sports, travel as well. If they stick to the rules, you can show them that you stick to the rules as well. But the interesting thing here is that all of us have different sides. All of us, for example, are a little bit carefree in one area of our lives, and we stick to the rules in other areas. So it's very easy for you to pick the right experience and to show that thing in common with the other side, right? This is seen a lot, for example, when people are trying to raise funds for investment, right? Because usually investors are very strict in terms of the rules. So usually what I always recommend is the person that is doing the fundraising, they have to show that they are strict as well in their own investments. Why? Because then the investors see themselves in that person. They think, I'm very strict. I have to be the one who is, saying no to most things, being, like the bad guy or the bad girl in this situation. And this person is just like me. So it shows identification. Or it could be the opposite, right? If the person is very relaxed and they think, oh, I want somebody that is very relaxed and that speaks with me in a very casual manner, you can show experiences like that as well. Again, you don't have to lie, right? You should not fabricate it. If there's a situation where somebody sticks to the rules and you don't stick to the rules, don't try and pretend, because that comes across in a disastrous manner. Even people who are very good at acting, they usually can't pull that off because it's not authentic. But what happens is, because we have so many diverse experiences, you usually can find an experience that connects with various types of people, right? So it's just about actively thinking about that experience. Then mirroring, as we mentioned, right? Mirroring is mimicking somebody's patterns, right? So let's say that you have somebody that they always end their statements by saying, does that make sense? We would like this project to get this done and to do this. Does that make sense? We would like to have, this quantity of employees. Does that make sense? You can start using that phrase, does that make sense, as well in your statements, because that bonds with the other side, right? It's like you are adopting a piece of their personality or behavior in yourself. And because of that, the person is going to bond subconsciously because they think, oh, this person is just like me, right? So it makes you seem similar to the person. Now, here's the thing. This technique, to be honest, it's a little bit more of effort, right? Sometimes we do it subconsciously, but if you don't do it subconsciously, what's going to end up happening is you have to remember what the person is saying or their movements, and you have to replicate them. Sometimes it's a little bit too weird, or it's too much effort, but sometimes it happens naturally. For example, I remember that I have a lot of Australian friends, and what would happen is, for example, in casual situations, you would have the American friends, they're speaking with them, and the Australians are always saying, hey, mate, with that specific accent. And you would notice that the other people start to copy their accent, right? So that's the type of thing that sometimes happens subconsciously. You adopt this type of vocabulary from the other person and you bond with them more. And because of that, you can persuade, because now they think, oh, this person is more similar to me. Sometimes it even happens subconsciously and you don't even notice that it's happening, right? And then finally, customizations, right? And when I say customizations, this almost seems like a product, right? Like a customized product. But no, I'm speaking about any type of communication. It's, for example, you have to send somebody a letter. And instead of sending a general letter, you send a letter saying, hey, I really enjoyed, speaking with you on this specific day. I hope that this specific thing about a life circumstance, it's better. So it's about injecting personal information to show that you remember it in a way. And because of that, you have identification. For example, if you have somebody at work that says, hey, I'm going to, I don't know, a specific game, I'm going to the cricket game on the next weekend. And then when you are speaking with them about the project next week, instead of making a generic project presentation, you enter the room and you're like, hey, how was the cricket game last weekend? I would like to present the project. Just remembering specific type of information from people, specific events from their lives, or even specific details about their job role or any other thing that they're doing, it makes something seem more customized, right? People always pay attention to what is for them. This is why, for example, again, an example of manipulation, how you should not use them, is a lot of platforms. When you have, for example, music that is recommended for you or content that is recommended for you, if you think about it, how many of these are actually recommended for you? You don't know. They could be, because sometimes they seem like they're things that are similar to what we know, but sometimes they're just random things that say recommended for you, right? So this is the type of thing that could be used in the wrong manner, but because in our mind, we always think, oh, this is recommended for me. Thank you so much for the attention. And it could be wrong, right? So you don't want to do that, but you do want to inject a little bit of personal information or knowledge. It shows attention. It shows that you care, right? And the interesting thing here is that you can tailor something a lot or a little to make it more persuasive, right? You can use the person's tastes, preferences, vocabulary, and others, but you don't have to use a lot. So to give you an example, when I was, for example, sending messages in terms of outreach on LinkedIn or other elements, one thing that you always do naturally is you don't want to send the same message to everybody. You go to the profile, you check the information, university they went to, career, and etc., and you build a more customized message. But the interesting thing is that if you fully customize the message by reading everything about their positions, their bio, their dreams, their goals, etc., and you make a fully customized message versus just seeing what is the name of their position and the university and just replacing one line of text, the results are mostly the same. In other words, you can just achieve the same personal effect with just a minimum of customization instead of a gigantic amount of customization. So to summarize this, right, a lot of information here. If you don't customize it, it's not that persuasive. If you customize it a little bit, right, just one piece of information, it's already very persuasive. And if you customize it with a lot of information, it's additional effort that doesn't get you that additional result, right? So you can customize something to make the other side more identified with you, but it doesn't need to be very customized. Even just a little bit already counts a lot, because the person notices, oh, you remember a piece of information about me. This is for me in specific. That's already good, right? And what are some do's and don'ts? As we mentioned, don't lie or fake commonalities, right? It may work in the short term, but the person finds out. There are situations where I've coached certain people, and there was one client that decided to do something which I told him not to do, but he did it anyway. He was a real estate agent, and he wanted to lie about experiences where, for example, if somebody had a child, he would pretend to have a child as well. He said that he understood their experience, but that never works in the long term, because what happens is when you see the person again, you don't remember that you pretended to do something, and you don't know how to speak about their experience because you didn't have it. So it's the type of thing that you never want to do, and it never gets any results. So what you want to do is you want to find the commonality that you have to establish that identification. But if you don't have that commonality, do not pretend. It's better to not have the commonality than to pretend it, because that will backfire spectacular, right? So don't do it. But also, important here, don't fully submit to the other side, because sometimes we want to tailor things so much to the other side that we kind of erase our personality and we just think about them. No, right? You have your value proposition, you have your communication, whether you are selling or pitching or speaking, you have your own personality. You want to tailor communication a little bit to the other person, but you don't want to do it so much that you forget your own personality, right? There is charisma in being who we are. So you want to be your own person that is just making a small effort. You don't want to make such a big effort that you erase yourself in the process, right? Which is an interesting insight here, but it is an important one. In most cases, I tell you to use more of these persuasion techniques. Here, I'm telling you, don't use this one that much, because if you make too much of an effort to please the other side and to tailor it to them, they'll actually lose respect. You want to be your own person and just make a little bit of effort to show that effort, right? If that makes sense. And then final family, which is consistency persuasion, right? Very simple. If somebody has said something, you want them to continue to say that thing. And if they have done something, you want them to continue to do that thing. If they have supported you in the past, you can get them to continue supporting you. If they have agreed with a specific thing, you can get them to continue to agree with that specific thing, right? So consistency is all about using what the person has done historically to get them to continue doing that. So, as we said, getting the person to continue a behavior or an attitude. And what are some common techniques in terms of consistency persuasion? So one are compliance ladders. And this is probably the most known technique, which is you get the person to comply with more and more things. First, you ask, for example, for a small favor, then a bigger favor, then a bigger favor, and you get the person to go up the ladder, if you will. That's where the metaphor comes from. And by the way, it doesn't need to be a favor, it could be an agreement. You can get them to agree with a small thing, then get them to agree with a bigger thing that is related to that one, then get them to agree to an even bigger thing. But either way, they go up the ladder in the same way. Then you have something that is called intent labeling. And this is a very interesting technique. You want the person to state that they're going to do something in the first person. Instead of you asking, are you going to do this project? And them saying yes, no. You want them to say in the first person, I am going to do this project. I'm going to take care of this task. When we say something in the first person, we hold ourselves accountable, because in our mind, we gave our word in a way. Saying things in the first person completely changes your level of commitment. And the final technique is active choice, which is very similar to the previous one. Whenever you have a set of choices, you want them to be in the first person versus being passive. So for example, if you have software, in the past, you would have something like, hey, do you agree with the terms and conditions? Yes or no. So the choices are yes or no. Nowadays, the choices are in the first person, right? So it asks, do you agree with the terms and conditions? And it says, I agree or I do not agree. The fact that the choices are in the first person makes the person more accountable, and the person is more likely to be persuaded to do something. So compliance ladders, as we mentioned, the first of the three, very simple. You get somebody to take a small action or to agree to a small thing or to do a small thing. And then you simply ask more and more of the same type. And why does this work? Because the person becomes invested, right? They think, hey, I did all of this effort, I may as well continue it until the end, right? It's what's known as sunk cost bias. How many of us have, for example, done a favor for a friend and then they ask another favor and you think, hey, I already did this favor, I may as well continue. Or even in a professional setting, right? You support a project for, I don't know, 1 month or 2 months, and then suddenly you want to leave that project, but you think, I supported it this far, I may as well continue with it, right? This is why this technique works. Then intent labeling. As we mentioned, right, you want to get the other person to state something in the first person. And this could be in a digital format or in person, right? It could be an email where you say, for example, hey, are you going to take care of this task? Please say, I will take care of this task. Or it could even be in a conversation, right? Somebody could say, I'll take care of it. And you can literally say, okay, can you say that in the first person? I will take care of it. And it is harder to do this in person, but you can just ask the person, what are you going to do, for example? And then you let them be the ones to say it, right? If you want them to take care of a task, you say, hey, so can you just summarize for me? What are you going to do? And then they will say, I am going to take care of this task. Boom, right? As soon as they say it in the first person, they are hooked in a way. They're more persuadable in terms of doing that thing. And then finally, as we mentioned, active choice, right? Whenever you present choices to the person, instead of yes or no, you want the choices to be, I am going to do this, I'm not going to do this, I agree with this, I don't agree with this, I consent to this, I do not consent to this. It makes the person always answer in the first person. And what are some do's and don'ts here? So one is, do not force people, right? If they don't want to do something, do not force them, right? They simply won't do it. So you want to kind of guide the person, but you don't want to force them. Then you do want to insist. If you need a person to take care of a task, then you ask them to confirm that you're going to do the task. And if they don't confirm that task, then you should insist until they confirm that. And finally, do not trick the person, right? For example, if you want them to give an agreement to something, make sure that you're explicit about them, right? If you're asking, do you agree with this project, for example, or do you agree with this proposal? Make sure that they understand their proposal. It's completely useless to get somebody's consent or agreement if they don't know what they're consenting to, right? So always be transparent. And if you are being transparent, and if the person really is aware of what they're doing, then you can kind of insist on them to agree with something. But if they don't know, do not insist. And these are the 4 families of techniques and some techniques within them, right? My recommendation here is pick one of these techniques and learn it well, right? Again, these are all over the internet. I think it's a wiki page with them. There's a lot more techniques, but you don't want to overload, yourself with 20 or 30 different techniques. Just take 1 or 2 techniques that you really like and that you think that are very easy for you to use and start using those. And then maybe you come a week later and then you watch the recording again. Maybe you pick on a different technique, but don't try to use them all at the same time because it just sounds weird, right? And in some cases, you want to use 2 or 3 maximum at the same time. You don't want to be that person that is, mirroring the other side while you're talking about specific numbers, while at the same time saying, hey, if we say that I agree to this, while at the same time asking them questions, it just becomes too confusing, right? So pick 1 or 2 techniques that you really like, use them well, and then think about the next steps, right? And I would just ask very quickly before closing the presentation, let's say that you have to present results for a project. Which type of these persuasion techniques would you use, and what specific technique, if any, right? So if you want, just drop a very quick line in the chat and say, for example, hey, I would divide the process into steps, or I would use appealing facts like percentages, or I would use consistency with the project manager, or something like that. So just very quickly, which technique would each one of you use? And with this, I close the presentation itself. Thank you so much for your time. And I think Ritu has a poll, if I'm not mistaken, before we head to Q&A.
So Vasco, in the meantime, Deepika says that she would use the identification technique for sure.
Yes, I was seeing that. I was wondering if I should comment because maybe I'll distract the people who are filling the poll, or is it okay to speak in the meantime?
Yeah, you can actually.
So yes, Deepika raises a great point, right? The interesting thing is when you use the identification technique, you have to kind of figure out what type of person the other person is. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not that easy, right? So for example, if you have that person at work that is very strict, they always follow every rule and every process, immediately you know the type of person that they are, and you can say, hey, I'm also the type of person that likes process and rules, and you can use that to identify with them. But what about, for example, if there's somebody at work that you just don't know, right? You don't know anything about them. You never spoke with them, you're presenting for the first time. So it works very well when you can use it, but you can't always use it. Or you may even have somebody at work that you know, but you just can't draw any conclusions about them. Sometimes they're strict, sometimes they're carefree, sometimes they're happy, sometimes they show no emotion. So sometimes it's very hard to know what specifically the person reacts to, or what their what their personality is. But yes, when it does work, it works very well. By the way, one bonus technique that I didn't even mention is that using a personal touch in something works very well for identification. So for example, if you have to invite somebody, instead of email, speaking with them in person, or even using your signature, right? Let's say that you have to hand a stack of documents to somebody. Instead of just handing them the documents, having a post-it with you handwriting, this is why I think this is important, works even better. Or using a personal signature, or giving a small gift, even if the gift is ridiculously low. Like, for example, they like coffee, so you go and get them a coffee when you go to meet with them, right? There are small personal gestures that work very well when you are, speaking with the other side. So in many cases, just using that personal touch works very well with identification. And by the way, if anybody else wants to comment on which one, okay, awesome. So Hamad has a great question. I don't know if it's okay to skip to the Q&A part. Is that okay? Are we officially in Q&A?
Absolutely, Vasco. Go ahead. No problem.
Awesome. So Hamad says here very well, there's a very thin line between precision and manipulation. How do we identify if we are on the other side? And is instinct helpful here? Yes, instinct is definitely your number one weapon, because if you feel like you are doing something that is questionable, then you are already done. You are already probably in manipulation. Now, the interesting thing is, persuasion versus manipulation doesn't necessarily mean good versus bad. It is possible to manipulate somebody for their own good, right? In a lot of cases, a lot of clients that I have do that with their own kids. They manipulate them for their own good. And it is also possible to persuade something with their full consent and to harm them. So persuasion and manipulation are not even about good and bad. In most cases they are, but they're not even that associated. But usually persuasion and manipulation, Hamad, the definition that I use is the other person aware or not? If you are persuading them and they are aware that you are persuading them and they are agreeing, that is persuasion. If they are not aware, then that's manipulation, right? To give you an example, if you talk about a product and you know that you really understand the product and you are selling it and they agree with it and you know that they agree with it and there's no surprises, you are persuading them. If you are selling them a product that has a negative surprise, like something is going to blow up and they don't know that, that is manipulation, right? Or for example, if you are selling a project internally and you know that the project is full of holes and everybody is believing in the project, but you know that that project has like a dark layer, then that's manipulation. But if you are selling a project internally that is good and everybody knows that is good and believes it, that is persuasion. So usually that's the definition that I use is the other side aware that they're being persuaded and do they agree with it? Even if they don't agree with it consciously, they have to agree with it subconsciously. In a way, it's very similar to, for example, personal relationships or dating, right? If you see that the other side is not agreeing that much with what you're doing, then you already know that something is seriously wrong there, right? There always has to be consent. There always has to be an agreement between both parties. If at any point you think that the other side is not agreeing that much with what you're doing, you have to stop immediately, because nothing good is going to come from that, right? I don't know if I'm properly answering your question, Hamad. If, by the way, any questions about how would you use them in different contexts as well? By the way, I see a question that is officially on the Q&A portion, which is somebody asking, will we get the presentation copy? I can definitely hand over the slides to the Ethica team and you can disseminate them. So I would say absolutely. Or I can share a link later, absolutely. Does anybody have any questions at all about the techniques? New questions, for example, how to use them in personal life with friends, or how to use them even with your manager or with your subordinates, how to do all of this very ethically and in a very clean manner with specific types of people, or even how to convince, for example, difficult types of people, right? How to deal with arrogant people, how to deal with narcissists, how to deal with manipulators, right? There are a lot of possible topics here, right? If you have any question about any of these, feel free to ask. I think that we still have a couple of minutes left, so maybe we still have time for like 1-2 questions maybe. But if there are no more new questions, then I think that we could break also. I'm going to assume that the lack of questions means that everybody understood everything perfectly, which is victory for everybody.
If anybody, yeah, somebody is.
Okay. We have one, Deepika. Okay, so how do you persuade a narcissist? Okay, so that's I set the trap for myself because I gave the example of how to persuade a narcissist, and now I'm going to have to answer that, which is probably one of the hardest questions to answer. But it's my fault because I gave the example. Okay, so with a narcissist or an arrogant person or a very dominant person, they always care about themselves first. They care about being listened to before they listen to others. So what you got to do is you got to first show respect by the other side, respect of the other side. Sorry. So as soon as they walk in the room, you have to say, hey, I understand your vision. I understand what you want to achieve. I understand that this is what you want. And then you share your value proposition. You can never go in for the kill with somebody that's very powerful or narcissistic or arrogant. Because if you go in and you start talking about what you want, immediately they are going to turn off. They care about what they want first, and then about what you want. So what you got to do is you go in and you say, hey, I understand that this is what you want. This is what you would like to achieve. These are your dreams, goals, etc. And let me show you how my value proposition helps you with that, right? So this is usually how you convince a narcissist or an arrogant person. First, you talk about what they want, and then you find a way to say that what you want is a way to help them achieve what they want. And then another trick as well that works very well, not a trick, sorry, another principle is that you get them involved in the process, right? So for example, if you're presenting a project to a boss who is arrogant, you cannot present that project as your own. You present that project as something that we will do together, and you will get, the credit, and you are going to evolve, and I'm going to evolve as well. So you always have to present something as something that is collaborative. If you present a project, for example, or a plan that they are not involved in, they are going to kill it because they weren't involved. You always have to say, for example, this is the draft that I have of the plan. What is your feedback? What would you change? And as soon as they are involved in something, then they're going to like it because it's theirs as well. It's kind of a shortcut. If you respect what they want and you let them speak about themselves first, and if you get them involved in something, then those are two very important principles to negotiate with somebody who is a narcissist, an arrogant, or that just has a lot of power in general. Fatma asks, how to convince a person who always highlights the 1% minus instead of the 99% positive? So a person that is focused on the negative, well, that's easy. A person that is usually focused on the negative is focused on hedging the risk instead of the positive potential. So in that case, you always have to highlight, be it a person or a project or whatever it is, you have to highlight what prevents them from getting something negative instead of getting them something positive. For example, you're selling a candidate for a team. Instead of talking about all of the good things that the candidate is going to do, you sell them on the candidate never doing the wrong things, right? It's just a matter of shifting the focus. Or for example, in other contexts, instead of selling the possibility of profit or too much money that is going to be earned, you sell the possibility of not losing any money because mistakes are not made, right? Some people are focused on the positive, some people are focused on the negative. And with the negative one, you just have to make them feel reassured, and you have to show them that the negative is not going to occur. That's what I would say. And I think there are two also in the Q&A.
Then in
Sorry?
Q&A also, we are having one question in Q&A from Himanshu.
Yes. Okay. So using emotions, can persuasion be effective without appealing to emotions, or is emotional engagement a fundamental requirement? Okay. So we are getting very deep questions today. These are very hard to answer. So people are like skipping to like the core. Okay. But I'm going to tackle this one. So Himanshu, I would say, in my opinion, no. Why? Because you usually have 4 different types of people. There are emotional, logical, versus being fast or slow. So you have emotional and fast, emotional and slow, logical and fast, logical and slow. So these are 4 types of people. There are many frameworks that use these 4 types of people, but it is possible to persuade people with just logic if they focus on logic. And people who focus on emotion, they just care about emotion. So it is possible to persuade without emotion, but it is a good weapon to have, because you are going to have people that always react to emotion and people that always react to logic. And usually these are very different people, so you can see in the way that you deal with them. People who deal with emotion, they're very excitable, right? They always care about the personal relationship. They're the type of person that they want to speak before the meeting, they want to go have lunch, they want the personal relationship. And you know that those care about the emotion, and then you can sell with emotion to those people. People that focus on the logic, they're very focus on the process itself. They're the type of people that, as soon as you get into the room, they're like, hey, good morning, can we go into the meeting? They're very focused on the process. They're very focused on the systems, on the rules, and on the logic. So If you figure out a way to tell the difference between these two by these behaviors and by what they show, you can change your persuasion type. It is possible to persuade with just emotion or just with logic, but usually you want to adapt to the different types of people that you meet. I don't know if I answered your question properly, but I would say yes, emotion is not necessary because it depends on the target, right? And then you also have situations where, for example, if you're speaking in public and you have 200 people, you can decide to use one of the two. You can decide to just use emotion, for example, and you are going to connect with a lot of people and not with others. Or you can decide to just use logic and you are going to connect with a lot of people and not with others, right? So I don't think there is a definitive answer. Some people really react to emotion and some people really react to logic. So I think it's more about figuring out what are the signs that this specific person is showing me and then telling persuasion to that person. And I think that with that one, we are officially out of time, right? Or there is one. Okay.
Yeah,
I would say
Vasco, but as long as you're okay answering the questions, we definitely won't mind.
okay. Yes, I have to leave in a couple of minutes as well, but
No
I will
problem.
take
Yeah,
this.
it's completely up to you. You can let us know when you want to stop, and we can
Okay.
take these questions offline too. We can ask them to write it to us, and then we'll send it to you, and you can respond to them over emails also.
Absolutely. So I'll take this last one from Shalini, and then maybe we break after that one.
Absolutely.
Okay. I would just say, Apurva just also raised the point in the chat. Is there a way to get in touch with us? Yes. My name is Vasco Patrici. So if you just Google it, there's going to be my email there. All my contacts are there. I think I have too much public information actually, but yeah, my contact information is there, my email as well. So the tackle was showing this question, how to make an employee understand the importance of following the process. It's difficult to keep missing deadlines and not follow the process even after receiving clear guidelines. I would say that maybe we have a different problem here, Shalini, which is this person not following the process because they don't know the process or because they don't care as an employee, right? There's a point where we have to ask, is it my persuasion that is failing or is this a difficult person? Because if you are dealing with a difficult person that does not want to do the job that has been assigned, you could have the best persuasion in the world, you're still not getting across to the person. But what I would say is, what could happen here is because they're not missing deadlines and they're not following the process, there could be the case where they are an emotional person versus a logical one. And maybe they are in the wrong position considering their personality type. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes you have people that, for example, they seem like they're very logical at first, so they seem like they're a great fit for a specific position, but then their personality type indicates that they should be in a completely different area. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm saying that sometimes that happens. But in terms of just what is it that you can do, right? If you really want to make that extra effort, you don't have to. But if you want to, in order to promote a good workplace, you can try and figure out what is it that appeals to this person and speak in their language. In our case, if you are using logic to convince this person, but the person is emotional, then you have to see what emotional arguments you can use to convince them, which sometimes is a bit weird, right? Because if I'm logical and I want to convince somebody with emotion because they're emotional, then I have to be the one to use emotion when I am a logical person, which is just weird. But you can use things like appealing to their, sense of friendship, to their sense of success, being an inspiration to others, all of the emotional arguments, and say, hey, if you get this job done, we're going to have recognition in the team. If you do this right, everybody is going to be, we're going to be a reference, we're going to be an inspiration. So use those arguments that appeal to that emotion, right? So emotion is a lot about success. It's a lot about relationships. It's a lot about stories. It's a lot about, at the end of the day, the person having an emotional connection with others, directly or indirectly. So what I would say is I would try to find out, first of all, is this somebody that you have not persuaded because they have a different personality type, or are they just doing a bad job, to be honest, right? And if you think that your persuasion could be optimized, then I would try to brush up on, is it a case where they are an emotional person that is doing a logical job? And so I have to convert my communication to a more emotional one to get them to do it, right? It could be the case, but I think also, I'm sorry, it's very hard to say that just from that information, right? Because there could be 30 different reasons why somebody is, not doing their job properly. It could be a persuasion situation. It could be an HR situation. It could be even that the person is a good employee, but they're having a hard time in their life, or maybe they have a health issue and they can't concentrate. And because of that, the performance is going down. There's a lot of different things that could happen here, right? So, but in terms of persuasion, I would say that's that. If maybe there's the possibility that they're not logical, they're emotional, you could convert the persuasion to emotional. I hope that I helped with this answer, right? It's hard to tell, this is a diagnostic with with such a simple situation.
Yes, Vasco. Thank you so much, Vasco.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Vasco, for an insightful session and sharing all the practical techniques on the persuasion and the leadership. And thank you, everyone, joining the beautiful session. And see you in the next one. Till then. So, and one more announcement we wanted to tell. We also started a prenatal yoga and Lamas classes. If somebody is there, please do join us. It is available in the portal. You can access. And we do conduct meditation sessions morning and evening.
Great. I'd like to extend, warm thanks to Vasco for, first of all, agreeing to do this for us, right? Agnostic to the time zones that we are, different time zones that we are in. So Vasco, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who's spent some time for the last 1 hour, listening to all of these techniques and trying to implement in their professional and personal lives as well. So I hope this is of, some help, and you can be a better person starting immediately after the session ends, right? It means a lot for us to be facilitating this session. So thank you so much. We are our next session next Friday is going to be on email etiquettes. How do you write convincing emails? How do you write great emails so that you get better responses? And how emails play a major role in our life, right? So we're doing that session next Friday. We'll be sharing a link with you. Please do take some time and join us on the next Friday too. Thank you, Vasco. It's a pleasure having you. We'd look forward to having more sessions with you going forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the Ethica team for giving me this opportunity. And thank you, everybody, for your valuable time and for your attention.